Hello, my name is Stephen Hernandez, Executive Director of the Connecticut General Assembly's Commission on Women, Children, Seniors, Equity, and Opportunity. Recently, renowned author Carl Wilkens visited E.O. Smith High School, where he spoke on his experience as one of 2 Americans to remain in Rwanda during the 1994 genocide. As a humanitarian aid worker, Carl Wilkens refused to leave Rwanda as thousands of expatriates and UN soldiers fled the country in the face of what is now known as the 1994 Rwandan genocide against the Tutsi people. Working together with Rwandan colleagues, they brought food, water, and medicine to orphans trapped around the city. He is the co-founder and director of World Outside My Shoes. As a commission focused on civic engagement, particularly among our youth, we thought it fitting to visit E.O. Smith and capture the youth experience for our viewers, as well as their reflections after the presentation. We also spoke to their teacher, Joe Goldman, who teaches a genocide class at the high school, on his motivations and hopes for his students as they learned about the worst and the best of what we are capable.
Hi, everyone. I'm Felicia Familaro, a senior here at E.O. Smith. The Rwandan genocide was one of the world's lesser-known, quickest, and most brutal genocides, and it continues to affect the people of Rwanda to this day. More than 800,000 people, predominantly Tutsi and moderate Hutu people, were ruthlessly murdered in less than 3 months in one of the worst periods in modern human history. While tension between these 2 groups had been brewing prior, this period of violence began when on April 6, 1994, a plane carrying Rwandan president, a Hutu, was shot down, killing everyone on board. Hutu radicals accused the Rwandan Patriotic Front, the RPF, an exiled Tutsi rebel organization, and initiated a massacre campaign against Tutsis. The RPF claims the plane was shot down by Hutus to justify the genocide. Hutu authorities sent kill lists to militias familiar with local areas for them to find and murder Tutsis. Because they feared for their safety, Hutu husbands even murdered their Hutu wives, and neighbors turned on their neighbors. Each day, up to 10,000 people were slaughtered. 70% of the Tutsi people and more than 10% of Rwanda's entire population were wiped out. This genocide ended in July 1994 when the RPF, supported by Uganda's army, seized further territory and assumed control of Rwanda. It's our desire with this event that we will leave with not only a richer understanding, but also a renewed understanding that we must never be complacent. I will now pass the mic to Joya. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Joya Miller. I'm a junior here at E.O. Smith. At the time of the genocide, our speaker, Mr. Carl Wilkens, was working as a missionary in Rwanda with his wife and his 3 children. When violence escalated into genocide in the country, almost every foreigner had the chance to be evacuated by the UN, but the Tutsis were not given that same offer, and they had to remain in their home country with the threat of impending heinous violence. Foreigners chose to save themselves over their Tutsi neighbors and friends whose lives were at stake. With the choice to leave with his family to safety, Mr. Wilkens decided to stay in Rwanda during the genocide because he felt that it would be unjust not to at least try to save his Rwandan friends and family, or friends and neighbors. What he did was extremely brave, and it could not have been a very easy decision to make. By the close of the genocide, Mr. Wilkens had saved almost 400 people from the senseless murder of the Hutus. Once he returned home, he continued his work to educate people on what had happened. In 2008, he created his organization, World Outside My Shoes, to speak about his experience in schools and elsewhere. One of the main focuses of his teachings is how human connection can prevent harmful conflict, and that's what we've gathered here today to discuss. Thank you all again so much for coming, and thank you to the E.O. Smith Social Studies Department, to the Human Rights Club, to UConn's Connecticut Writing Project, and E.O. Smith's Deliberation and Discourse. Without them, this event and others like it can't happen. And thank you a million times over to Mr. Wilkens for giving us his time and this amazing experience. Everyone, please give a round of applause for Mr. Carl Wilkens.
Thank you, each one of them. Each one of you, the warm welcome. And I think about all the hours, not just preparation, but study. And I mean, Shoot, I know I loved homework. Not. But I hope, yeah, it doesn't feel like just another study or class. I mean, obviously for me, it was our story, you know, it was part of our life. And I'm just really grateful for Joe and the whole team here for the chance to share a few stories. I'm really looking forward to some conversation. I was asking a couple of you at the beginning, what do you think the students really want to hear about? And they were talking about, you know, reasons, why, motivation, how it affects you. I really feel bad if I finish a visit and we don't talk about PTSD and trauma. Or for example, if you're looking for a question and you're just not sure about one, ask me to talk about the difference between remembering and reliving. Big difference there, and love to talk about that. I got like 100 rabbit holes I could go down, and so I try to stay on track. I'm also a visual learner, and so I've got just lots of pictures because that's what works with me. And I often like to start with something that's not genocide, because Rwanda, for so many people, I mean, it's hard to change a bad reputation, huh? And while this is tea, not coffee, some of you might know Rwandan coffee. And some of you, of course, the gorilla that was just there, that's what Rwanda is famous for. It's actually becoming a tourist destination, not just for gorillas, though, but mountain bikes and all kinds of fun stuff in this gorgeous little country. I actually need to make a newer slide here. This is probably 5 years old. The smartphone, high-tech smartphone factory, that's about 5 years ago. I feel like one of the latest things I saw was the electric motorcycles for taxis. Whenever I go with people there, I'm like, don't take the motorcycle taxi, it's too dangerous. But then when nobody's looking, I'm on a motorcycle taxi because it's so fun. And now they're electric. And I'm like, how does that work? Because the battery goes dead and the guy's done for the day. Nope. Pull into the station, pull out the massive battery pack and shove in a new one, and off you go. Technology is exciting, but the most exciting thing for me is how people are learning to live together after something so horrible as this. So if I had my choice, I'd spend the whole time with you just talking about that, putting the pieces together. How do you actually really learn to live and trust after something as horrific as that? I know some of you have watched a documentary. You got a fair amount and a background. Some, I was told, not a whole lot of background. And so I'm going to kind of just whip through here. 1990, that's our cute little family there. When we moved to Rwanda in 1990, and as you heard, we were building schools and partnering just with the people to try to make life better. Really was a fun place to raise our kids. Our kids have wonderful, fun memories from that time together there. But then, of course, after 4 years, this horrible thing was launched that's called a genocide. This was not a storm that was inevitable. This was so man-made. And people often ask, did you see it coming? And we'll probably dig into that a little more. It's interesting. I heard your figure of over 800,000, and that's the figure that I believed for a long time until recent studies showed how they were messing with the census in the country. And of course, they're still digging up bodies even now whenever somebody's in their garden and they come across bones. So when you talk about it affecting people, it has these different ways that sometimes I'm sure the people of Rwanda must wonder, will it ever be kind of not part of our life? And for this generation, this is the big question. When I first made this slide, I said, can people who've been killing each other live peacefully? And they're like, no, that's not right. This isn't a story of people killing each other. This is a group being targeted. That's what genocide is. It's a group being targeted for extermination. So then I started thinking of somebody in specific who I'll introduce you to in a minute. But Filbert, can he live next to people he failed to kill? He was involved in killing. Can he live peacefully next to people he failed to kill? I'm going to dig into some of maybe the nitty-gritty of this timeline and things like that if you ask questions. So I'm going to kind of skip over that right now. I want your questions to direct it. We'll come back to the Rwandan Patriotic Front and who they are in a minute. But I want to just spend a moment here on this picture. These are the architects of the genocide. Small group of men and women was actually talking with some middle schoolers not so long ago and asking, how could they have been thwarted? Who could have stood in their way? Who could stand in the way of genocide? I mean, the UN was there with 2,500 soldiers. Surely they could have stood in the way. After World War II, the Holocaust, the soldiers come to these camps and they find these gas chambers, these exterminations. They find people stacked and like walking skeletons, and they're like, no, this can never happen again. And now we've got an army there in place, and it's happening. And instead of calling for an army, we remove the army. And I was interested in this one middle schooler, his response. Who could have stood in the way of these people? He said, maybe their closest friends. And I'm like, whoa. I was kind of expecting religious leaders get in their way. Education people get in their way. Just community leaders get in the way of genocide. But he brought it right home for me. Sometimes it's our closest friends. I mean, my son told me once, I guess he was reading a book. He said the idea of this book, which he said he felt was really valuable. And I mean, I say my son, he's in his 30s. And he said, you're the compilation of your 5 closest friends. And I'm like, whoa, I hope that's not scary. And I know it's not exactly true, but I really appreciated, the idea, the architects of the genocide. And I also put this picture up here to be really clear. This is not a tribal story. This is a political story. And right now, for you guys, I mean, when I was telling this story in 2005 or 8 or 10 even, talk about politics and it's a political story, America was very different then. I talk to you now and tell you this is a political story when, it was hard to appoint a speaker in the House. You kind of understand this a little closer, I think. It comes a little closer to home. This is an illegal seizure of power. This was a coup. This was a group of extremists who were not satisfied with the idea of everybody having a voice. They wanted to hang on to power. So there was some ethnic tensions, but the majority was marrying the minority marrying by the thousands. Really hard to find, at least in some parts of Rwanda, people who don't have an uncle or an aunt or a cousin whose parent or who the adult themselves has a different mark on their ID card than them. I find it hard to use the term Hutu and Tutsi because there's so much of that intermarriage. I would say so much of that love that was happening before the genocide. So now how are we going to, I don't want to write a 70s song or anything. Okay, I just made that line up. But how are we going to break up the love in this country is really what this story is about. And their main agenda, their first agenda, is exterminating the enemy. This idea that, I don't even like to read this sentence. I wrote it probably 18 years ago when I first started traveling to schools, trying to figure out how do you explain genocide, especially as you go down to middle school or something like that, And the reason I've stuck with this is probably because it still has a tiny place in my brain. Not that I want to kill anybody, but still sometimes somebody cuts me off on the highway and it's just easier to think it'd be better without those kind of drivers. You know what I mean? That we're going to solve a problem by getting rid, by eliminating, temporary at best, genocide at worst. So we'll come back to that. The quick little timeline I want to give you. We've been in the country for 4 years. We thought we had peace in the previous August. They had a peace agreement. I heard the explosion around 8 o'clock Wednesday night, April 6th. Didn't know what it was. Found out it was the president's plane. The extremists will blame his death on the minority. They'll say, we've got to eliminate the minority. We tried to kill him at the time of independence, years leading up to 62. We should have killed them all. Babies, grandmas, we're going to do it right this time. And they launched this horrific thing that we call now genocide against the Tutsi. The prime minister there on the far right, she's killed on Thursday. The UN soldiers who are supposed to be protecting her are told to lay down their weapons. They're taken prisoners. The 10 Belgians are killed, chopped. Some of these things I just don't want to say them fast. In fact, some of these things I don't want to say them. I think about their families. What if one of their nieces or nephews is one of your cousins, you know? They killed them and they chopped them into pieces to give this horrific, brutal message to the world. Get out of Rwanda. To the UN, get out. To the foreigners, get out. And it worked unbelievably well. Most all of the UN left, and maybe in our conversation time we'll talk about the handful of UN soldiers who stayed. But I was Zooming with some kids in Poland this morning, and I usually ask students before they ask a question, what do you love doing? And one of the girls there at the American school in Warsaw said, Model UN. And when she has free time, she likes doing Model UN, and I love that. I mean, but here we are at the Security Council. The decision is being made here. And if you want to dig deeper in the story, you may watch the documentary, if you haven't already, Ghost of Rwanda. It's a tough one. It's a tough one to watch. I always tell people don't do it alone. But you'll hear some incredibly moving and powerful and meaningful stories as you try to unpack why we did. Why, not just why would neighbors do that to neighbors, but why would global neighbors abandon? And, you know, people often say, you know, what, you know, could America have done? And I'm like, well, what we could have done was not use our influence and our power to withdraw the help that was already there. So, yeah, if you want to talk about the UN, definitely we'll dig into that. This whole idea of creating an enemy. Enemies are not born, enemies are constructed. And they had no social media, so using the radio. And the same message I hear today, we heard then in Rwanda, only it was in Kinyarwanda. So I learned to speak French, but not Kinyarwanda. So I didn't hear the messages, but my coworkers, my neighbors, my friends, they all heard that message and they told me, yeah, we're under attack and there's not enough. That scarcity mindset, that fear mindset. And you want to control people, let's get them, let's use fear. At least in the short term, it'll work. Because you have to keep, with fear, we adjust and acclimate. Then you got to ramp it up some more, and you got to ramp it up some more. And so I'm going to just touch on a story here that some of you saw in the film. I'll go a little deeper than what you saw in the film. Wednesday night, the plane is shot down. Thursday, the American government is saying, stay in your house. The Rwandan Patriotic Front will take over in a couple of days. It'll be more dangerous to try to evacuate. Thursday is the day that the UN soldiers were killed. Thursday night, a gang came to our gate. We're putting our kids to bed in the hallway, our kids 10, 7, and 5. We're putting them to bed in the hallway, just trying to get as many brick walls between us and the bullets that are flying outside. And unbeknownst to us, a gang has gathered at our gate. And our neighbor ladies, when they heard it, they came to the gate. They pushed through the crowd. They got between the gang and our gate. And they said, no, you can't go in. They started literally pleading for our lives. We were less than 100 feet away. We had no idea what was going on outside. And we learned about it the next morning. The young lady who lived and worked in our house from Rwanda, she was talking to the neighbors through the fence. And they're like, yeah, they were here last night. They wanted to kill your family here. And I asked Anita, the young lady who heard the story, what'd the neighbor lady say? She said, well, basically, they told him that you weren't Belgian. I mean, that day, Belgian UN soldiers had been killed. There was a wild rumor going around that Belgium was involved in shooting down the plane. Wild rumors fly during this time. They told him you weren't Belgian in case maybe they just, mistook this white family for a Belgian family. They told them about little acts of kindness that you guys had done over the years, like taking a pregnant lady to the hospital in the middle of the night. And then they told them how your kids played with their kids. And I'm like, really? Really? And I've thought about that story untold times over the years. At the beginning, I didn't think a lot because I don't think I had the emotional bandwidth to process that we were that close, our family, to being part of that more than 1 million who were killed. but also it's just so mind-boggling. Sometimes we don't know what to do. And in recent years, I've just really dove into how does the brain work? Because I think there's a lot of answers there. In fact, I think if there's one thing we should teach in school, it's how the brain works. And do we have some biology okays for that? Anybody here? This is my little version of it, okay? This is my simple version. And so I often oversimplify things, but basically we all are familiar with the fight-flight part of the thing, and you dig a little deeper, you find out, the amygdala is controlled, and the amygdala can be like a hijack, and the good place, Dan Siegel, check him out on YouTube, neuroplastic, what would you do? No. He uses upstairs brain and downstairs brain. So if you're really curious about this, just search Dan Siegel, upstairs brain, downstairs brain. And he talks about how basically the upstairs brain goes offline when when the whole brain kind of gets hijacked by the amygdala. So I want you to, it's pretty much a no-brainer that somebody who's there at our house to kill is down there in the fight-flight part, eh? And so these ladies, they could have said, what's wrong with you? Those are just innocent people in there. There's just children in there. And it would have driven them deeper downstairs in their brain. But instead, these ladies choose stories. Oh my goodness. Friday, I was with a survivor of the genocide at Northampton High School. And Omar was 10 at the time. He survived a massacre at Nyamata Church of more than 10,000 people. He survived under the bodies. His story is just, for me, I was having a hard time. Okay, you see me getting a little emotional now. If we talk later about remembering and reliving, I don't have any problem with tears. I used to have a knot in my stomach when I told these stories. That's reliving and how dealing with it. I didn't have that, but on Friday with Omar, I came really close because our oldest was 10 years old at that time. I'm such a believer in finding the good, and I don't think he said that, but he said something like that. Don't feel sorry for me because I'm finding the good all the time, everywhere. And that ability to find the good has been one of my ways of healing after this genocide. Now, these ladies use that method of telling stories, not to get everybody out of their downstairs brain, but just the leader maybe, or the person close to the leader. And to me, what's even more important about this tool isn't recognizing when somebody else is in their downstairs brain, it's recognizing when I'm in my downstairs brain. And what's my strategy to get out of there and to get in the good place again? And what are things that can come to me? What do I watch? What movies, what stuff do I watch that puts me in my downstairs? It's not just fear that puts us downstairs. It's helplessness that puts us down there. It's frustration that puts us down there and stuff. And sometimes we need to be there. That's why our brain is like that. It's a good thing to survive. But other times we're down there when we don't need to be, when I would be so much better in my upstairs brain. So I could go on and on about it, but this is just one of the little things about how the brain works and how I try to think, especially when people ask, why did they do it? It's not a full answer. You can't just say they were in their downstairs brain. How did they get there? Wow. You mean they went through 3 years of war? Yeah, that was really hard on the brain. And they were susceptible to threats. Fear was a major part of their thinking. So it wouldn't take much to trigger and send them down there and then do things you never would have imagined doing before in other situations. The American government says, like all governments, they were telling their citizens, get out of Rwanda. And I just want to, because you heard, at least a good chunk of you heard the story, not just for those who didn't, but I wanted to just touch on one thing that's really important to me. My mom and dad were there at the time, so you can begin to imagine the level of complexity there. They're grandkids. I'm surprised I got this far in the presentation. I haven't shown you any pictures of my grandsons. They're perfect little guys. Okay, do we go there now? I think we better. I just have so much fun. They're all over the place probably here. If I just come back to my pictures, we were just in, okay, that's Leo. Leo is going to be 1 next month. And these are Lisa's sons. Oh, this was a fun. The sunlight was just right. There's Kai. Kai just turned 2, sitting next to his mom. So I think about my dad. I don't talk about him that much. He's such a good friend in public, because you can tell, wrestling. But like I said, tears are not the issue, and I don't have a knot in my stomach. But it was a tough conversation between Dad and I when I told him I'm staying. And I can only imagine now. I'm actually older now than my dad was then. I'm 65. He was 62 at the time. And when he finally saw that I was going to stay, he said, well, then I'm staying with you. I'm like, no, Dad. You got to take the kids. You got to take Teresa and the kids to safety. And I want to just make it really clear with you that I didn't make this decision by myself. Teresa and I together, we made the decision that I would stay. You see, they told us, get your family together. We're driving out of here. But they also told us, don't bring any Rwandans. And this young lady on the far right there, she lived and worked at home. She loved on her kids. When somebody loves on your kids, that's like fast track to family. So it wasn't like our family and Rwanda. People in Rwanda had become like family. And we couldn't, we condemn the planners of the genocide for targeting people to kill just because of their ID card. And we, leaders in the modern world, make a decision, the American government, that, and I understand, your citizens' safety, your first priority, but don't you have a plan for the other people? Don't you? And when they said you can't bring any Rwandans, they treated Rwandans with so much, Rwandans treated foreigners with so much respect and privilege. My wife and I together, we thought maybe we can use that privilege and help this young lady and the young man there on your left who he was the watchman. The plane was shot down, and an hour later, roadblocks were up all over the place. He couldn't get home. And so those two people had Tutsi ID cards. They were marked to be killed. So they, along with the U.S. government, who said you can't bring any Rwandans, that's kind of why I stayed. And not knowing that more than 1 million people would be killed, not knowing it would go on more than 3 months, a lot of stuff I didn't know, not knowing most of the UN would leave. But what I knew is those people were there in our house, and maybe I could make a difference. And so I really want to mind our time here, and let's just jump. Okay, I know this can seem sort of like a little bit of a repeat, but I got 2 reasons for doing this. One of the Rwandan men I was working with, you remember in the film, hey, this was the guy, they came to kill the people in his house, he offers them chickens. They're his neighbors. He's not a foreigner. He doesn't have the privilege of foreigners. He doesn't have a gun, but he has a reputation for integrity. What you believe and what you do, boom, they're right there together. The local government guy, who's of the majority, married to a lady who's of the minority, comes to him and says, the local neighborhood, like mini mayor, the counselor in the neighborhood, I don't know if I can protect my wife and kids, Gasikwa. Can they come to your house? And so it's going to be Gasikwa's integrity that this guy is counting on to protect his wife and kids, not a gun. And I suppose this story shouldn't be a surprise when you know Gasikwa. That, he comes out, and instead of saying to his neighbors, let's call one of them Bernard. Bernard, you should be ashamed of yourself. These are just women and children and stuff. They're our neighbors. They're not. Would have driven him deeper in his downstairs brain. But instead he comes out and he goes, Bernard, these are hard times, huh? Your kids are probably hungry. Do you want some chickens? I don't think any of the people who are involved with killing were 100% committed killers. I think they're all different degrees of motivation and fear and perhaps anger and bitterness and stuff. But talk about moving from your downstairs brain to your upstairs brain. You want to take some chickens home tonight to your kids. And I just impose these words: respect, empathy, and inclusion. There are a couple of values that are really central to our work, and how respect for me is an assumption of value. I come here, and my respect is about an assumption of value and the time we have, and value in each one of you in your life. We just came through MLK, Martin Luther King Day, honoring, and the idea of the value of every person, knowing how valuable you are, was so central to his work. And when we have that assumption of value, then empathy comes naturally. Empathy with Gasikwa, oh my goodness, through kindness moves from the downstairs to the upstairs. And Gasikwa is like my favorite example of empathy first. I do not usually respond to crisis with empathy first. I don't respond to some sort of criticism or attack is a little too strong, but something uncomfortable. My first response is not empathy, but I want it. And I'm working to rewire my brain towards that I could actually respond with empathy. So when the guy cuts me off on the road, I'm not like, what a jerk, but I'm like, I wonder if he just got a call and he's headed to the hospital. I don't know. But to replace judgment with curiosity. Where are my glasses? Did I get rid of those out of there? Where's my these are my favorite glasses right here. To replace judgment with curiosity, to replace this idea that my world will be better without this we're going to solve the problem with, oh, by the way, okay, I mean, you don't have to pull your phones out right now, but I know they said put your phones away. But if you see something you want to remember and take a picture of, get your phone out and take a picture of it. But don't do it just to please me. I mean, okay, it would be nice, but don't do it right now. You can do it later on another picture. But let's get back here to Gasikwa for a moment. This idea of reframing. Now I'm diving into just some of the tools that have been so valuable, and some of the tools for me personally, and some of the tools that I think have been happening in Rwanda. You see, one of the ways that I find freedom from anger and bitterness, that's my basic definition of forgiveness. Freedom from anger and bitterness. Doesn't have anything to do with whether the person who harmed me deserves it or not, whether they're sorry or not. It has to do with me getting free from anger. Reconciliation, that might have to do with whether they are sorry or not. Can we actually come together? That isn't always safe. It's not universal. But the idea of getting free from anger and bitterness directly related to what I call one thing thinking. And that would probably be a really good time to transition to Maria and Filbert, and then to transition to some questions and conversation. Maria, you love this woman from the moment you see her warm smile and you hear her story. You're just blown away. Her courage, her level of strength and resilience. She lost her husband and sons. She and her husband split up, her taking the daughter, her husband taking the boys, hoping that maybe as 3 or 2 we might survive hiding. Someone might give us some food. A little easier if we're not 5 of us. And it worked for her and the little girl and not for her husband and son. She would introduce the guy next to her, Filbert, as an incredibly valued family friend. I can't imagine planting time, harvest time. I can't imagine even the in-between time without him and all the friends he brings to help me. My goodness, he does things for me like my sons would have done if they were here. Now, when she made that statement, does things for me like my sons would if they're here, I already knew the other part of the story, that Filbert was in the gang who killed her husband and sons. So I'm already struggling. And she goes, well, he does things for me like meaning a nice thing. He does things like my sons would have done. Right away, I fire in my brain thinking, yeah, well, if he wouldn't have killed them, they'd be here to do it for you. You don't hear any reconciliation there. You sure don't hear any empathy there. You might hear anger there. What you're hearing is somebody who was stuck in 1994. 25 years later, I'm still wrestling with stuff I'm stuck in 1994 with. Because I'm still defining him by one thing, the worst thing that I saw people do. And this one thing thinking is my greatest enemy to getting free from anger and bitterness. Maria, kind of the shorter version of this story, she'll tell how initially when he got out of jail, didn't want anything to do with they understandably tried to avoid each other. He came back to town. That's where their family, their property wasn't real easy to sell and pack up and move somewhere else. She didn't have that luxury. But then the government had this great program to help build homes, and you do the work, make the adobe bricks and stuff, and we'll give you the roofing sheets, something like that. And she starts to see Filbert a little bit different. But you know what the real turning point, she says, was with Filbert? It was meaningful when he confessed and he came and apologized to her. She said that was important to hear, to experience. But when he told her where her husband and sons were buried, She says, that was a turning point. And for me, I'm thinking, which way? Huh? You could be even more angry as you come here. But no, I hadn't lived in her shoes. I didn't know what it was like for years to not know where your husband and sons were buried, to even wonder maybe one of those boys is still alive. And so this process over time of Maria seeing Filbert as more than the killer. I mean, shoot, for us, somebody betrays you, somebody, I don't know, does you wrong in sports or in school or something like that. That can be bad enough, But how do you not see somebody as one thing when they take your they take your family from you? And Maria, just over the years, bit by bit, I would put forth, she was forming new neural pathways in her brain. Because I'm often asking the question, like so many people who learn about the genocide, and even like Rwandans are asking, how can somebody go from kind and generous to a murderer? What is that like? What does it take? How does that happen? And we know it happens. We know people change for harmful. I don't want to say change for bad, because I'm really trying to get away from good guy, bad guy talking and thinking, because I think that's really not helpful for me in understanding how we are, who we are, and how we are. So I think about harmful things people do, or even bad things, but we know that happens. People can seemingly change and do harmful things because we see the bodies. What's really hard to believe is, can they ever be trusted again? And not just trusted, but could they be a better neighbor now than they were before the genocide? I would put forth that Maria says, no question with Filbert. He's one of our best friends, my daughter and I. To the point that when the daughter grew up and got married, they invited him to the wedding. And I heard that, and again, I'm stuck in, and I'm like, oh. And they didn't just invite him, because Lisa had just gotten married a couple years ago, the little mom of our grandsons. We were just fresh, that was, 2019, fresh out of that wedding. And I'm like, Maria, I don't know, maybe I shouldn't have asked her, but I just felt like I had to. Maria, and maybe I thought I had the privilege to ask her because I stayed during anyway, I said, Maria, didn't you have some family who survived and came to the wedding? And she said, yeah. And I said, well, weren't they angry? She says, yeah. Well, why'd you do it? She says, because it was my house. And I'm like, whoa. Maria is in charge of Maria. Maria's healing, Maria's journey, Maria's everything. Maria doesn't let other people decide for her. And you know what she said? As quick as I said, weren't they angry? Why'd you do it? She jumped out of the spotlight and put Filbert in the spotlight and said, but his family was angry at him when my daughter had children and asked him to be the godfather to those children. And my initial response, because I was still sort of stuck in 94, I don't give a rip about him and his family. But today I really do. Today I do give a rip about him and his family, because I'm getting free from the anger and bitterness, because I'm trying to get free from one thing thinking, defining people by the worst thing that they've done. And I think I'm headed that direction because Maria is such an inspiration. Man, Maria did that. And look how free she is. Look how kind-hearted she is. I honestly didn't even want Filbert in the picture. I asked Maria for a picture, and somebody must have said, Filbert, go get in the picture. And I'm ashamed to say that I was like, oh, I don't want him in the. And then I'm like, oh, well, I'll just crop him out. And I'm like, are you kidding me, Carl? You're standing next to this incredibly strong, courageous woman, and you're thinking those thoughts? And so, yeah, I need to own those thoughts, but I also know that I can change and I can make new pathways in my brain. I can fire to rewire. It'll send you down a wonderful rabbit hole on YouTube. Dr. Joe, fire to rewire. Okay, we got to get into here. Oh my goodness, look at the. Okay, so let's just back up here for a moment. Maria and Filbert. They are the kind of, we zoomed in on Maria and Filbert. Let's back up to how does Filbert get out of jail? Okay? How do the thousands, tens of thousands of people who went to jail get out? One would be regular, okay, let's go ahead over here. One would be kind of the regular punitive, the regular court system as we understand it, right? Who's to blame? Punish them, justice. But that would take more than 100 years with over 200,000 people. They don't have the money, they don't have the lawyers and stuff. So they went back deep in their history, and they went to something that we've discovered all around the world, particularly with indigenous nations, a restorative approach to harm. Not a punitive approach, but a restorative. And not that every indigenous population is perfect either, but we've seen this again and again in studies, New Zealand, all over. Canada seems like they're into it deeper in understanding than we seem, but we're working on it here in America too. So they went to this idea. This is super oversimplified, so forgive me if I don't want to insult anybody's intelligence on this, but I just want to try to get on the same page. We're not so interested in blaming as we are understanding the harm so we can make a decent repair plan. And we can't just have it in the hands of lawyers and judges. Everybody's got to give us their voice to understand. A little more sophisticated drawing that I came up with is this idea here of, again, blame, punishment, justice. Or what if justice isn't our end priority? What if our most important priority is not making somebody pay? You know, that's this word retributive, huh? I just shortcut it to punitive, which is not a fair shortcut, but not making people pay. Wait a minute, if they don't pay, won't they do it again? How many people who have, quote, paid don't do it again? I mean, I get caught usually in something. I try to figure out how to do it without getting caught. And I mean, you know, that's just, I don't know if that's human nature. So, how are we going to learn the truth? And don't try to unpack the harm without first having a safe place to do it. Build that community. That's why when we talk about restorative practices in school, we're talking about circles and we're talking about building relationships and having tools and mechanisms. Just mechanisms sound so sterile, but having practices, just habits of open communication, habits of honesty, habits of even vulnerability and stuff. So when things get to be really ugly and we're trying to understand the harm, we already have this really important foundation in place of the community and safety there. And then we can try to unpack the harm, which is really a hard thing when you're talking genocide, hey? And how are we going to repair that? And justice, how will that figure into the repair plan? But our ultimate goal is healing. And this, we're always going to have this. Some people say, you know, could you do this in America? We are already. Some schools are doing it in the schools, some communities, some states, some state attorney general. Is that what they're called, state attorney general? Yeah. Some of those people, this lady in Florida, I forget how many years ago, it's present. We will always have the punitive system, though, because this is the one when it's nothing but adversarial. This is the beautiful one when it gets collaborative and everybody is part of that thing. So the way that it played out in Rwanda was they set up, and you who studied, you're familiar with Gacaca, huh? These community courts. Pick a committee of people you trust. And Rwanda has in their constitution that a third of every decision-making group has to be women. From parliament to the Gacaca committee, a third of any decision-making group has to be women. Because we're trying to rebuild trust. How foolish would it be to try to rebuild trust and suppress the rights of women? Instead, we take advantage of the power and the skills and the strength and the courage and the compassion as in this trust rebuilding exercise. And say you're Filbert. You don't know when you're going to get a regular trial, but Gacaca, which is not really a trial. That's why I'm coming to understand it more and more. Just the other day, I was telling somebody, Gacaca was for the guilty. Okay? So let's not even try to compare it. There's no defense lawyers. There's no prosecutors. This is a way to find healing. Are you ready to share what you did in front of the people you did it to or who survived or who watched you do it? Are you ready to answer their questions? Are you ready to tell the truth and begin engaging, actually talking again? What's going to be a place that'll give us permission to talk about these really hard things? How can we understand the harm? And afterwards, this committee will decide, I think this guy is safe to go to the repair plan in the community. Did you hear the way he answered the questions? Did you hear the way he kind of hemmed and hawed and whatever? I don't know what their criteria was. There were more than 12,000 of these courts. Some of them leaned heavy, sending them back to jail. Others of them were like way heavy and sending them to the community repair plan. Some in between and stuff, but they would make that decision. Talk about empowering. History, colonialism, one of the things of colonialism, and I'm no history expert, but I lived there, I lived on the continent for 13 years, and one of the things that I really came away with was this horrible message that says, you can't solve your own problems. Somebody else is going to do that. Man, talk about empowering. I'm not expecting the government to solve. They did more than 1.9 million cases. That just is a number I can't even wrap my head around. Tens of thousands of people went through Gacaca. The decisions were made. And yeah, it's open to exploiting abuse. It's open to taking advantage of. The restorative process is not a hard cut and dried. It's messy and stuff. But they pushed through that. And those that did go on to the community service, this is 40 men. I was there with high school kids, maybe 2015. And these men, the kids were asking them questions for about 2 hours about their experience. And then we turned it around and said, what do you want to ask the kids? And Charlotte is here responding to a question. You've studied the Holocaust. You've been here to Rwanda. You've seen the genocide. What difference does it make? And I'm like, dang, that's a hard question. When I looked at students, when Charlotte raised her hand, I'm like, yeah. She comes up. She says, to be honest, I don't know. But one thing I do know is when I go back home, I'm going to make sure that I get closer to people who I consider different from me. And those of you who would like to ask some questions, and if you want to come closer, you can come closer. If you want to move back, you can move back. Whatever you want to do. But what would you like to begin to unpack here in this story? So you're seeing a boatload of parallels between, and for those of you who couldn't hear, she's talking about in poor areas where violence is kind of a part of the regular daily thing and stuff. You got really, really good people, but how do you get out of that? And she said some do, but many, it seems like impossible to get out. And it's so easy when you haven't been there. You mentioned people who are close to you, and those of us who may not have people close to us in those situations, really hard to connect and understand and to see it anything than one way. And, well, if you wanted to, here's, and Barack Obama, or we pick up different examples and stuff like that, and we're like, that's wonderful, but that's not the reality for so many people. And I think that's really important. That parallel that you've drawn there is really important. And I think that makes Charlotte's words even more important, that I'm going to get close to people I consider, that I've been, I don't know, maybe afraid of even, but people I can get closer to. Thanks for sharing that. Appreciate it. I've only a couple of times gotten into some like juvenile facilities or prisons and things like that. And I always look at this story different through the lenses after I've spent time in some of those really hard places like that. Always when I might spend a time at some place like Deerfield Academy, very privileged, and then spend time at an inner city school in South LA. And but this story, it does have, there's stuff from what the people of Rwanda have been through and are going through that I think really, encourages me in so many situations. It's not the silver bullet, but I think it's a lot, yeah. No. That's exactly. It's when we feel it that we begin to understand it. And that only comes from a closeness, from an intimacy that doesn't. And you watch it and you think, oh, TV, oh, wow, I read a book or I saw a movie once or something. And they have their place, without a doubt. But not until, I mean, that's why I felt so hard at times to explain to people why I stayed. You don't know how that young lady loved on our kids, and that if you leave, she'll be killed. And if you stay, she might not be. So, yeah, it's really hard. I used to talk about the head and the heart and the gap between the two. And like, this doesn't make head sense, but it makes heart sense. And that willingness to enter into the world of the other, I don't even like that term anymore either, but thank you. Thank you. You had a question, and then I'll come.
Starting to talk about this a little bit, but when you decided to stay, and once, the plane left and you were there, what was the strongest emotion? What were you feeling?
He said once I decided to stay and the plane left and I was there, and actually the convoy of cars left. It's interesting too. Right now, as I start to feel a little tightening inside, I tell myself, you can remember this without reliving it. And I'm going to just hijack for a moment. It was when I finally got professional counseling that I really started to come to learn the difference and to try. I've searched around the internet. I call it dual perspective, but I haven't found. I'm sure somebody out there has it in the internet. But the reason I call it dual perspective is because I try now to go back to those stories. I mean, the natural way to go back is the 36-year-old Carl. And you go back and you relive it, and the emotions and the hormones, everything is going on, the knot in my stomach and stuff like that. Now I go back 65-year-old Carl with 36-year-old Carl to my driveway. When I said goodbye, I was barefoot. I watched it drive away. I was waving. I wanted my neighbors to see that I was not leaving. I was just hoping that kindness and compassion they showed the foreigners might just help us in this situation. And so I go back there. Actually, I haven't done that exercise here, so pardon me if I'm turning this into a therapy session, but basically the 65-year-old Carl is standing next to the 36-year-old Carl and saying, that was a good decision. It was hard. But damn, you've got an amazing wife. And so I go there now in those memories with the tools that I have as a 65-year-old. Stop and breathe. You're here at this high school talking with these kids who care about what's going on there. Center yourself, ground yourself, and go ahead and visit it together. And that way you can remember without reliving. And so some of what probably the 36-year-old Carl would have said back to the 65-year-old Carl is, this isn't going to last long. Basically, I was throwing up every kind of denial. I'm not going to die. This is not going to last long. I said goodbye to Teresa thinking 2 weeks maximum. We can do this for 2 weeks. And probably in 3 weeks, you and the kids will be back. And 3 weeks, and I hadn't even left my house. 3 weeks, and I still hadn't even put any shoes on for 3 weeks. And so as I think about what your question, what I was thinking and feeling at that time, I was definitely thinking about Teresa and the kids getting to safety. And I was sort of in this denial, I think, of that. I think it's the body's way of coping, you know. I'm not thinking I'm going to die. I'm not thinking I'm the only one. I'm not thinking I'm alone, because I wasn't. I not only had those two people already in the house, the young man who came in the evening as watchman, the young lady who worked, but I invited a pastor and his wife to come. And those of you who saw the film, you met Pastor and Mrs. Soraya. And I invited them to come and join me in my house. And honestly, I never was alone. There were always people who were, I'm just like I said, a visual learner. Pastor and Mrs. Soraya. She's the one who would help us get food. She's the one who would go down to the gate. That beautiful smile would disarm the people who had come to harm us. She would talk to them like an auntie or a mother. And so I also think now, as I think back on it, courage is contagious. I know reading stories impacted the decision I made as a kid, whether they were stories from the Bible or whether they were stories from the Underground Railroad, the French resistance, World War II, all of those stories, they would have all had an impact. But I think I also need to do a little more time with your question. I'll probably go do my own little journaling because they're hard, and I think in these hard times we don't recognize what a friend our emotions are. Now, I was a shop teacher, so I compare it to lights on the dashboard, and they let me know when something needs attention, and I need to listen to those things. But I guess from this perspective, I would say my feelings were feelings of denial. It's going to be okay. We're going to make it. It's going to be all right. We're going to make it. Thanks. Did I see someone with a hand? Yeah. Oh, thank you. Thanks. And I appreciate you saying openly about that. I feel it's really important when I talk too about it that I just talk about it descriptively. That's where I find my source of unconditional love. But I think there's so many places for people to find unconditional love, and for us to be free to choose and not try to I think the reason I felt an urge to say something right now is I think so many times in Christianity there's a sense of an agenda and trying to convince people of this, or you should do that and that. And I feel really strongly religion should just be about connecting me with love and my neighbor. And that's where I would be basic. But anyway, didn't mean to hijack your comment or question. Thank you. Okay, I'm looking at the clock, and I could go on and on about this. His question was, how do you hang on to your faith about God and even trust in human nature or humanity? I really have done a pretty serious rewiring. I used to think about the strongest evidence of God in miracles. See a miracle, that's a strong evidence of God. Now I'm like, I believe God does miracles and stuff, but like 90% of my evidence of the existence of God is like the neighbor lady standing in front of our gate. It's like Gasiqua offering chickens. I think that God works through the choices of people. Whether they identify with the word, the label, the name God, or anything else, I believe in love. And I think that love is seen not so much some supernatural way, but also in the actions and choices of people. And so my question often, a lot of people say, well, where's God? If God is all powerful and all loving, why wouldn't God do anything? I reframe that question to say, where are the people who know love? And because if you don't know love, how can you expect people? And I mean, okay, that's for me coming out of the Bible. If you know love, you know God. If you don't know love, you don't know God. And so I would rather, though, in a broad setting, talk about love. And that just is empowering to me, that I'm not looking for some supernatural, quote, miracle to happen. I have the ability in my choices to love somebody. And if I don't know unconditional love myself, it's really pretty hard. I really wrestled to love someone else in deep, meaningful ways. I really wrestled when the psychologists, the other people were saying, you can't love anybody more than you love yourself. You have to love yourself before you... And I'm like, wait, I can love my kids more than I love me, but I now realize that if I do not value, and there's a difference between selfish and a selfless love. But it has been that rewiring for me, and it's been through journaling that I've stayed connected to my understanding and my source of love through that. Religion, I get really angry at times at that, and yet I don't want to throw it under the bus. My friend Omar, who I was telling you about, Omar's dad converted to Islam. On Fridays, his dad would take him to the mosque. On Sundays, his uncles would take him to the mosque. On Sundays, they would take him to Mass. Omar was saying, cut it short, see if we have time for one more question. Omar was saying, religion doesn't own me, I own religion. And that was just last Friday, and I've been thinking a lot about that since then. And I think about, this sweater doesn't own me, I own this sweater. If this sweater is helpful and useful in the kind of person I want to be, stay warm, whatever, or religion is helpful in being that kind of person of connecting to love and connecting to my neighbor, I will use it because I own that, but it doesn't own me. And I thought that was pretty amazing piece of wisdom. Thanks for that question. Do we have time for one more, Joe? I think we got one more. Okay. Please. Right. Right. So, and I really appreciate and respect General Dallaire for how openly he talks now about mental health and getting help. I just love that he makes himself vulnerable and he just spells it right out there. Like you said, there are times he wanted to end his life. And so for me, in this short period of time, journaling has been huge, and I think that's all part of introspection and just spending time with yourself and trying to uncover subconscious beliefs that we hold, because I don't care if they're subconscious, they're still affecting my thinking and my actions. So journaling is a great way for me for processing, finally getting past the stigma and going and talking to a counselor and spending time, getting tools, getting vocabulary, getting permission to explore things and having somebody also help point out inconsistencies or fallacies in my thinking. Wait, what pronoun did you just use? He said one time when I was telling him stuff. Having that kind of help, invaluable. And the last thing would be this idea of being able to talk safely and freely and not like bleeding all over the place, but when appropriate. In a group like this, to be able to talk safely with even a smaller group. My brothers are incredible friends. My wife is an amazing listener. So the crazy thing is when we need help the most is when we're least likely to ask for, or we seem powerless to ask for it. And that's why sometimes as close friends, we need to say, what can we do here? Let's talk. Let's do that. It's led me then to be much more intentional about finding the good, about developing neural pathways. I have control in many ways of the pathways I build in my brain. So the choices I make and recognizing I'm building pathways. First, I was working on pathways of gratitude for food. It was an easy one. And then I'm like, hey, I can thank toll takers. Hey, I can thank TSA guys. Hey, and I got a great TSA story. But thanks for that question. Hey, you guys, thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate your interest. If some of you have questions that you didn't get a chance to or you'd like to later or something, you can work through your teacher and stuff and email me. Or I've often told teachers, especially like today when I hog the microphone, that I'll be happy to make a little YouTube video to respond to some of your questions. Or we'll just do a Zoom, or your teacher will just put their phone on speakerphone, and I hope we'll talk and meet again. Fortunately, COVID, I got out of the habit, but I finally started to remember again to bring books with me. I wish these are about the 3 months of the genocide. So if you saw the film, this is like an expanded version of that. This is not about the restorative journey of Rwanda. I hope something will come someday in that area. So this is just about 94. If you'd like, welcome to take a copy. If you can make a contribution, there's a website in the back, $5 or whatever, just to help books keep going to other schools. But if you just want to take it and read it and give it to somebody else, that could be your contribution. So there's a stack of them, Joe, right in the back there. So thanks. Who do I give the microphone back to?
Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Where am I? Hello, everyone. I'm Griffin Stacy, a senior here. We'd just like to thank everyone again for coming and being such a great audience. And if you'd join me, we could also thank Carl one more time for being such a great speaker. Thank you so much for sharing your story and teaching us about your experiences in Rwanda. And on behalf of Mr. Goldman's genocide class, we'd like to ask that everyone here continues to think of these ideas and have these conversations even after you leave the library today. If you have any more questions or want to find more information, There's another talk at 4 o'clock at the Dodd Center today. So you're highly encouraged to go join that talk at 4 o'clock. So have a great day. Thank you so much.
So first of all, welcome. And that welcome comes with just a real layer of appreciation, not only for the work that, of course, Joe's done, Mr. Goldman has done, in bringing this particular course of study to life at your school, but also to help guide your own journey in becoming practitioners in what we call life. Right? Whether it's civic life or your personal lives, building yourselves, your families, and your communities. And so for me, it was really compelling that one way in which you decided to practice that was through this experience with Carl Wilkens. So tell me a little bit about what that was like, because this isn't an easy topic, and it can be difficult to experience. So tell me, let's start with you. Tell me a little bit about what it was like to experience this particular topic.
It's pretty surreal. I mean, right off the bat, this isn't really something that gets talked about a lot ever, pretty much anywhere. And so Mr. Goldman very generously got us in touch with Mrs. Feiner, who's a Holocaust survivor, and so that was incredible. And then to meet a survivor of like a different caliber, one who like chose to stay, and to like kind of pick his brain and like see why, and then he like teared up a couple times, which, you know, he went on to emphasize like the difference of remembering and reliving. It's just like so surreal to actually, because there is a difference between remembering and reliving, and to like be able to, even though we can't relive it, to be able to kind of like see how one might cross between them gives like a whole different world of understanding. So it's super important that people, you know, reach out and like hear these things in like these classes, because that's really how you like understand these topics and why they're so important.
That's so great. There are different layers that you're describing there. I love the idea of remembering and reliving, and in so many ways it really refers to what we were talking about earlier, and how it is that you capture moments, right? Moments that you capture, you can remember and relive. The moment of experiencing Carl Wilkens' story from the present experience and conversation that he led, that you'll remember and relive. But he's remembering and reliving something very, very specific. So tell us about that remembering and reliving from your experience with Carl Wilkens. What did he leave with you as part of that conversation and presentation?
He mentioned towards the end that when he looks back, he gets very teary-eyed, and he tries to remember rather than relive, and he tries to stay in his like 65-year-old self rather than going back to when he was 20 and 30 and kind of reliving all the like traumatic experiences that he went through. And I think that was so important, like to me on a personal level. I feel like it made me realize that to really have this sort of like empathy and this sort of growth, you really do need to kind of stay in the present and remember instead of kind of relive and stay in that one mindset you were whenever that experience happened.
You know, a lot of what we do here really focuses around empathy and connection, because what you just described is spot on. It's not just being able to see yourself or imagine yourself in that moment, But what is the connective tissue that's created when you do that? The process of understanding another, of being in someone else's shoes, either through imagination or experience, it bonds us. So tell me a little bit about how the experience of Carl Wilkens bonded you to perhaps the experience, the greater experience of the genocide in Rwanda.
One thing that really stuck to me he talked about was the upstairs and the downstairs brain, and how he kind of focused on like empathizing with people, where if you're in a situation and you're just reacting to violence or you're creating this violence, and the ability to just kind of step back and realize that you're in a fight or flight response, and the way that these people are acting violently towards you, like you don't need to do the same back. You can he talked about specifically one person was in their house and someone came in to try and kill them, and he offered them food and was like, I know your kids, I know that you're having a rough time and you're probably hungry, like here's some food to bring home to them. And he just really emphasized the fact that like you can like see other people's points of view and try and de-escalate situations.
Tell us a little bit about your experience, what you walked away with.
I mean, I think as someone who like goes to like see people speak a lot or things like, it was just very refreshing to see someone who is just so like humble and positive and like clearly passionate about other people. And also like when you go to see some like a survivor, it's usually very personal, which is what it's supposed to be, but also he made sure to emphasize like the impact of the community, and like he was like, it wasn't just me, like it was a network of people and we were all trying to save each other. And I really like came back thinking about like not just the importance of him, but the importance of everyone who was working with him.
You know, I really love that notion. It wasn't just me, we were all trying to save each other. And you know, there's something amazing that's happening, I think, in your first take on civic life, which is your family, and then your next take on civic life, which is your school, right? Is that you're doing just that. You're expanding your network of us. So you know, in some ways, you're at different levels, I would imagine, in your experience in high school. I think you're almost done. What are your levels in high school? What?
I'm a senior.
I'm a senior.
I'm a junior.
Junior and a senior.
Yeah.
And you know, do you remember back long ago when you were in middle school? Tell us a little bit about how you've evolved as people as you've gone through the experience of expanding your network, not only of impact but also of connectivity.
Well, when I was in middle school, I didn't do much homework. I was pretty school oriented, but I was just kind of like I don't know, I picked things up really quickly, so I didn't really try that hard in terms of like how much I could have done, and I just liked to hang out with friends. And a lot of times that meant I didn't express myself in like when I entered, I was like, oh, these clubs, you know, I could be coding, or I could be, you know, building robots, all these cool things, and then I kind of dropped them because a lot of my friends weren't doing them. And now I've realized, well, clubs aren't just a way for me to like do what I want to do, but also to meet other people who are like-minded or maybe not like-minded, and to like just see more of life outside of, you know, there's nothing wrong with being with my friends and people who like the same things I do, but to just experience things with different people at different times in different places. I think that's the biggest thing I've gotten out of going into high school and taking classes like this that aren't offered everywhere. And that's been super important to me.
That's amazing, that growth from that be together that you described in middle school and that build together that you describe in high school. What an amazing transition. I think we all go through that, right? Yeah. We're I think born into the being together of family, the being together of those early experiences where just being next to each other is enough, right? But once we start building together, it's a different kind of allure, and it's one that lasts for a lifetime. So thanks for describing it.
I think as far as, well, in my middle school, it was K through 8, so I knew everybody I went to school with for 8-9 years of my life. So I feel like going from maybe 40, 50 kids in my grade to however many now has kind of made me mature, and I was kind of forced. I mean, I also was a freshman during COVID, so that really affected like who I became friends with and such. But I think with the workload in middle school, I kind of completed the work to get the grade. But in high school, you kind of get to a point where you realize that if you want to learn, you have to care about what you learn. Like, I didn't have many choices in what I took in middle school, but all the electives, like, this course is not required. Like, I took this course because I care about what I'm learning about, and I want to actually understand and learn about this stuff, and having these opportunities makes it even more enjoyable.
That's great. You know what's great about college is that you get an extra dose of that feeling when you go to college, because then you are actually orchestrating your path, which is very, very different. You take a sense of agency in that path that's even a more expanded version of what you just described, and that's remarkable that you're able to have that experience now. Thank you.
I think for me, in middle school, I was very focused on like getting good grades, and I kind of saw like I'm the student and the teacher's there to teach me. I'm just here to learn and get like an A in my class. And then as I went on throughout high school, I developed like actual relationships with my teachers and talked to them, and they became like friends and people I would actually talk to about what's happening in my life. And then I realized like you can have, they're more like adults in your life. They're not just like there for you to get knowledge from about a certain assignment. And like,
I love that. You know, we were talking about this earlier, how the process of going from being an audience member to the adults around you, to actually being a collaborator with each other and then with the adults around you, that's really powerful, because collaboration is really the key to what you'll be doing once you gain the keys that you just happen to gain when you turn 18. It's a big set of keys, but you do get them. And collaboration is really critical to that. And you see that here. You know, you've had that experience in this building even, of just the importance of collaboration, even when we're disagreeing. So, go ahead.
For me, I think my middle school was focused. I moved like halfway through 7th grade, so I was like, I don't know any of these people. So I was more focused on obviously doing well in school, but like making bonds with people and just like trying to fit in with a group of people so that like I have people to hang out with, so I'm not like by myself. And I think in high school, I feel like I've developed more into someone who, like Will was talking about, like someone who surrounds themselves with people sometimes when they like want to get something done. Or I joined a lot of clubs when I came freshman year, and I'm still a part of those clubs, so like forming those communities of people, like I'm in a lot of human rights oriented groups, so like finding people who are like-minded and passionate about the same things as me, and like being able to collaborate with them and build those types of relationships with them where we're working towards a common goal. And then also just like having a personal life where I surround myself with people who I'm super close with and care about me and share similar values, instead of like worrying about like having a large group of friends or like going to parties and doing things like that. Just like, it's not, a lot of these groups overlap, but just like having different areas of my life and collaborating with those types of people in those different groups and like keeping those relationships.
That's great. You know, relationships are a theme that I'm hearing, right? The building of them, the creating of them, and then the working through them to do things. Now, one of the things that we do, I think, that is so important to our being able to live together and build together, is that we do the work of this democracy, right? Understanding our institutions, understanding our role in those institutions, how we plug into them, how we impact them, and in some ways how perhaps they might leave us out at times. So I'm wondering, you know, it'll be very soon that you're, if not already, that you're going to have the franchise of being able to make stated decisions about who you believe can best represent you. What does that mean to you to be able to have the power to vote and to have voice in that way?
Well, I often talk to my friends a lot about this, because like as we're turning 18, they say, I don't want to vote, I don't know anything, and I say, well, that's the point. When you turn this age, you gotta learn, because to me it's about finding who you think represents people best, and that's important because that's who you stand behind. That's who you put your trust in. They're going to be the people who represent you and, hopefully bring this country forward, or even your state or local community forward. And you need to, be a part of that, because if everybody thinks, oh, the next person will do it, who's going to do it? You need to understand how it works and who you're behind, because that's how you're going to see the progress you hope to see.
That's great.
I was actually going to say something similar to what Will said. There's this idea where, one person, like, if I don't do something, it's not going to affect anybody, because, what was one person going to do? But if multiple people have that mindset, nothing's going to get done, no progress is going to get made. So I feel like whether you are big into politics or not, I feel like just voting and kind of making, even if it's just one person, I think kind of having your input in there, whether it makes a difference or not, it's still like, well, I did what I can do. I was a part of, I voted, and I feel like having a sense of like involvement kind of makes me feel more like at peace. Like, okay, I did what I could, and I did what.
That's great.
Yeah, I think it's like finally giving kids like that voice that they look for. I feel like so many times when you're younger, you are like, oh, I need to say this, like I want to speak out about this, and then you don't really have the opportunity because you're younger. And then a lot of people, when they turn 18 or when they get older, it kind of like that feeling gets watered down, and they're like, oh, like I know some people that haven't registered to vote even though they are 18, because they're like, no, I don't need to do that, like I'll do that later on. But it's like when you finally get this voice, I think you should use it.
I mean, I know I'm really excited. I haven't turned 18 yet, but at least like working in this building, you see like how important like someone's voice is, because people are listening to the things that you're saying and the things that you want. So I think like if we want progress, like I want progress, especially like our country's very divided right now and things are very divisive, but like votes do matter. Like especially in Georgia, things are so close in the last election. So like those little things really, I think, do matter. So I'm very excited, but I don't know. I lost my train of thought.
Thank you for that, and thank you for bringing up the example of one of our sister states, because Joe and I have often talked about how every state is a democracy unto itself. We live in a constitutional federated government, and each, which is a collection of democracies. And Connecticut gets to express its version of democracy in the best way that it can. Just recently, the people of Connecticut voted to require early voting in the state of Connecticut. And that's for the reasons of perhaps increased access, for increased ease, so that more people can avail themselves of the franchise that is our agreement to make decisions about representative democracy in the way that we do. So this is important to us. It's part of our collective work together, and you understanding not only the depth of what that means for yourselves, but also that building that you're describing when we come together in common voice. And representative democracy is a tricky democracy because it requires that we have that trust, but that we also observe and hold accountable those that we call to represent us. And looping back to the experience that you had with Carl Wilkens, a lot of that accountability, a lot of that representation, a lot of that engagement is lost along the way to tyranny. And we've seen it time and time again, how an erosion of our democratic principles, our principles of a founded in democracy, can lead to tyranny. And the tyranny can express itself in so many different ways. We're very creative when it comes to hurting each other, unfortunately. Now, the message of Carl Wilkens was that we can be as creative when it comes to being optimistic and lifting each other up. So I'd love to hear from each of you some of that optimism that Carl Wilkens talked about and how it may have impacted you.
Well, the example he leaned heavily into was restorative justice, and what they're doing in Rwanda is the gacaca system, which is it's essentially like a restorative justice court, I guess. And it's apparently seen a pretty astounding success. And it's slow here, partly because I think not a lot of people know about it, and that's why I really like being involved in the program I'm involved in. Because I think it really is it's a very powerful tool. And I think, like you were saying, when you're building your like social net, it starts with family and then school, and restorative justice is really effective because oftentimes when wrongs are done from people onto other people, it's because they don't really know each other. They're not in each other's social net. So you bring them together and you have them just talk. Not accusing the other or anything like that. It's an opportunity for them to kind of expand their bubble and stop making each other the other, and then make each other us, not them against each other.
See themselves in each other, that
Yeah.
empathy that we were talking about. That's really powerful.
There was this this quote from the end of his book, of Carl Wilkens' book, and I'm gonna mess it up because I forget what it was, but it was something along the lines of how the Rwandan people show that they're not defined by what they lost or what they don't have left or what was taken from them, but rather what they can do with like the aftermath and what they do have left. And I feel like that was a very powerful. It was in bold too, so I felt like that really set in with me personally, mainly because I feel like that's something that can be taken into any situation, and I think that highlighting that rather than looking at the negatives and what how we can be creative in the negative ways, I think looking at what we can do to improve with what we do have, what we have left, is much more progressive.
I love that.
Yeah, what really stuck with me was that after Rwanda, all the Rwandan people were trying to come back together and have their community again, and with the trials, they would. He talked about how the opinions for each trial would differ, but a lot of them voted to have these people just put back into society and okay, we think that they feel sorry for what they've done and they know it was wrong and that they aren't going to perpetrate this again, and they let them go and said, okay, we forgive you, and I thought that that stuck with me because I'd never seen that done after the impact of genocide before.
I think what was really powerful was for every bad thing he mentioned that people were doing, there was always a story of positivity and community, the women standing outside of his house protecting his family, or we were talking about earlier with the man with the chickens, throughout all this fear and violence there's still humanity in all the positive ways, and I think how he emphasized that was really powerful. And also what Will was talking about earlier, I remember we were watching a documentary at the beginning of the year. I don't remember what it was called.
White right meeting the enemy.
Yes, so it was this Muslim woman. She was talking to Nazis, and a lot of what they were talking, a lot of their hatred just came from a lack of understanding and a lack of even just knowing. So you were talking about expanding your social bubble, so the importance of community and just talking with others and understanding their opinions, that really stuck with me.
It's really powerful, and I have to commend you, Joe, in the work that you've done here, that you've all done here together, because oftentimes what you hear in the collective psyche of the newsreel, in the collective psyche of politics and politicking, is you hear fear. You hear fear in the people who are experiencing strife. You feel fear as a result of the messages that you're hearing from politicians and from and projected through the media. But what you don't hear are these powerful examples of what happens when you take empathic humanity. You learn those difficult periods that we've had in our life together over generations, and you layer over it hope and restoration. And when those things come together, what you have, hopefully, is the opportunity to build a stronger set of agreements among each other so that we can actually do better. So I commend you, Joe. I commend all of you for doing the work and for having it feel fun and accessible because this is the work of the rest of your lives. So congratulations and thank you for joining us. So welcome.
Thank you.
So I'm really excited to have you here today for a few reasons. One, I don't know whether you know this, and I may have told you this, but one of the fundamental principles of this commission from its very inception through its predecessor commissions is that we not only face the legislature, but there's also a civics component to what we do. And it's civics in action. It's not about getting a voter effort necessarily. It's not about creating a particular advocacy around a particular piece of legislation necessarily. It's more around bringing the people's voices to their capital in as close to and tangibly a lived example as possible. Sometimes it means people themselves, sometimes it means their voices, their representation. There are different ways that people can be civically engaged. But one of the most important things that I think we do is our Parent Leadership Training Institute and its corollary Children's Leadership Training Institute, which is a democracy school for young people. And part of what we do there is that we help people understand the power of learning, understanding, working across difference. So when I met you, I was so excited to meet you, first of all. First, tell us who you are and what you do.
Sure. So yeah, I'm Joe Goldman, and I'm a teacher at E.O. Smith High School. And my connection here is that I have a genocide course, and it's a bit unique because there's not too many courses that focus on genocide offered in the state of Connecticut. I just asked a center here that sort of focuses on Holocaust education, how many of them are there? And they said, we don't know. There's not a whole lot. But the point of the course is to do exactly what you're talking about. It's to try and encourage students to understand the complexity of history, and it's dark history, but the complexity of this dark history in a way that's going to push them to be more civically involved. And one of the things that you said to me made me think about the way our students are becoming like the purveyors of their own knowledge. At a certain point, I like to move the students towards making sense of the history without me delivering it to them. So part of what we did at E.O. Smith was we offered students an opportunity to take control of their own learning and also to offer them an opportunity to share it with the rest of the school. So anyway, as a teacher here, what I'm trying to do is to push my students to think more deeply about history and looking at it in a balanced way through the lens, in this particular course, through the lens of genocide.
It's really amazing because your process itself is agnostic, it seems, in terms of the particular issue that you may be talking about, right? The notion of young people being agents in their own learning, agents in their own experience. But the question of genocide is not really an agnostic one. We take positions on genocide, and as a place that's always trying to improve itself, hopefully, a democracy that's always trying to improve not only the access that we have for people, but the way we treat each other. We take positions on difficult issues, genocide being one of them. How do you manage talking about difficult, compelling, sometimes controversial issues while still upholding the principles of young people being able to seek for themselves?
I've been asked a similar question before, and it's not easy. Because we're dealing with such traumatic history. And so I guess it's through very thoughtful consideration of what history I present to my students. My goal is not to traumatize them. My goal is to push them to think more deeply, but at the same time to understand that the reality of the history that we're studying is often traumatic, and that may sound contradictory or hypocritical, and I'm curious now to hear what the students think of that, but it's important not to just show gratuitous violence because genocide is full of that, but when it is shown or when that history is revealed to them, to do it in a way that pushes students to think more deeply about the moral questions that we're confronted with on a regular basis. And here's just one example. When humans are pushed and when fear is introduced, how often do we stand up against hate? This comes up all the time, whether or not we experience genocide, right? We see hate in the world around us. It's a feature of our lived experience. When do people stand up for what's right? How often does that really happen when they're pushed in the opposite direction? And so I push my students to consider these sorts of moral questions through the history that I present to them.
You know, it's really powerful. We've had a lot of discussions here in policy making over the years about how much should children be exposed to when it comes to history, what's developmentally appropriate in terms of delivering knowledge and facts, because it can be really tough. You know, one of the hardest things that we talked about most recently, just a couple of years ago, we were talking about suicidal ideation and completion, and how young is too young to be talking to children about suicide. What was interesting, I'll tell you, Joe, and it was so compelling for us to learn that the first major uptick, statistically significant uptick in suicidal ideation and completion is at 10 years old. And when you start to understand that, when you start to understand not only that the warning signs, but also that moment in human development where those pressures are leading someone not only to understand that sense of self and that sense of agency, but also to take that leap that might lead them to a decision that is fatal, is a really powerful one that happens much younger than we thought. And for reasons that have less to do with exposing them to the conversation and more to do with human development and pressure and trauma and however it is that mental health issues even weigh into those dynamics. So sometimes children are ready and young people are ready to talk about difficult things. You know, just specifically about this most recent conversation that you had, where you had Mr. Wilkens come and speak to your school and to your students. What was striking to me about the young people is that not only were they ready to have a conversation about genocide, but their reflections were actually very deep and astute. Tell us a little bit about what you found, how you found the experience of your young people, their ability to digest, but also to learn and to extrapolate for themselves.
Well, you know, for me, I was so proud of them, because really the greatest honor that a teacher can have is to see their students becoming teachers themselves, right? I mean, they had been saying during the course of the semester that they felt like there wasn't enough emphasis on this sort of dark part of history, that there's sort of a sugarcoating of history that takes place. And maybe it's because teachers don't want to offend students or they're uncomfortable with the history themselves. And we explore the different reasons why some of the darker parts of history aren't the emphasis of the typical history class. And they came to the conclusion that ultimately there's an imbalance in the way this history is taught. There's too much lack of knowledge around Holocaust education, and the data bears that out. When people are asked how much do you know about the Holocaust, we find striking issues there in the world today. And they wanted to be part of that solution. They wanted the school community to have a better understanding of the reality of the history of genocide. Carl Wilkens in Rwanda is part of that. Very few people really understand the Rwandan genocide, but 800,000 to 1 million people were killed in 3 months. That's a really significant event, and they wanted to make sure that people had a certain awareness of that, and they took on the they took on the responsibility of hosting and planning for that event, and I was there to support and facilitate, but it was their own writing to introduce him. It was their own planning to encourage people to attend. They took on a huge part of that responsibility, and so they were becoming the teachers within the school community, and I just couldn't be more proud of that.
Joe, there was something really powerful in that moment where young people were digesting what they had experienced through Carl Wilkens' presentation. One of them was the connections that they were making between that moment, that fraught, horrendous moment in the history of a people's, to other moments in histories of peoples, including Native Americans in this country and other places. That connection right? Those connections that they were making are critical, it seems, to the learning process and to being teachers in that way.
Well, they're looking for a pattern, right? And they were starting to see it. So this history plays out and has played out over and over again. And we're not just studying history to memorize facts, but to understand why this history is happening and why it's happening over and over again. Many, many millions of people have been killed as a result of war crimes or as a result of genocide since the Holocaust, when genocide was supposed to have stopped happening. Never again was what the world was calling for, and yet it happens over and over and over again. And I think these students are trying to understand why that is, and so they're connecting these other bits of history to each other to look for that pattern, and I think they're starting to see that. And I've always told them, like, the goal of this class in studying inhumanity should be to realize what humanity should look like. So by studying this awful history, we're not just dwelling in darkness, but we're looking for the light. And I think they're starting to see what that looks like. And I think by making those connections, they're getting a little bit closer to that light.
Now, for those who have watched the Carl Wilkens presentation, there's a theme in his work that is at the same time honoring the depth of genocide, but also honoring the beauty of optimism and the power of restoration. Tell us a little bit about your intentionality around looking for someone like Carl Wilkens, perhaps, to tie those two elements together.
Carl Wilkens calls it finding the good, and he's someone who has every reason to see the bad in the world because he lived through it, and yet he is just eternally optimistic. He's constantly looking for what's good in each other, and he has so many amazing stories that he can share about why we should move forward with reconciliation instead of punishment. He believes in restorative justice, which it's this very thought-provoking concept. And so by hosting him, we expected that students would be exposed to new concepts, at the very least that would push them to think more deeply about how to apply things like restorative justice in their own lives on a local level. This is something that a school could implement. A school could have a restorative justice program. What would that look like? To instead of punishing kids for everything they do wrong, could we apply a system where students are confronted with their own actions in a way that's restorative and productive? So these are things for students to continue to think about. But this was all part of the hope that I had, is that students wouldn't only learn more about the history, but they'd be exposed to ideas that they could apply in their own lives.
You know, that's really, there's some interesting themes that I'm hearing here. Well, the first one is, you know, that the repetition of history, but also the repetition of that optimism. You know, in other places and other times, we've called it truth and reconciliation. Yeah. You know, you describe the restorative practices, which is a localized but really compelling way of looking at how it is that we, in a way that is consequential, think about consequences, rather than just punitive. And really thinking about restoring relationships in that way, in a way that preserves us, but also helps us continue to build together. That's really powerful, Joe.
Just today in class, we were having a conversation about this very thing. Hate leaders that had left hate groups and now were speaking out against the hate that they once espoused. Yeah. And I had one student essentially put it something like this: my heart is telling me that that person should still be punished, but my mind is telling me that that won't help. That won't, you know, going after that person is only going to push them deeper into hate, you know, sending them to jail, locking them up for the rest of their life because they had done things to promote hate and they had caused harm. And we can't forgive that necessarily. We can't accept that. But it also doesn't do any good to punish them further when they're no longer a threat and working to support the very communities that they once attacked. And there was that conflict between their heart and their logical thinking. And that's something that they grapple with.
Isn't it amazing, because it almost tracks those moments of child development and youth development where we are competing with the with our early senses and our early instincts as we continue to refine and grow into the development of the frontal lobe, it just seems that the science and the experience really overlap in this case, don't they?
And in that way, we're promoting the upper brain, the development of student logical thinking, and that's part of what's woven into the class.
That's amazing. And that, to me, I think is the importance of the teacher's role in this space. The intersection of some of the things that you're describing between history and civics is something I think that resonates for a lot of people who may be watching. But, the three-legged stool of history, civics, and social emotional skills building, right? Empathy and connection. Those things, those skills that we don't often talk about. But I think of them as all the white space on your resume where there aren't any letters. And that's how we relate to each other, how we build together, how we solve and resolve for conflict, and ultimately how we leave the world better than we found it. Your students talked a lot about that, I think, in their reflections on Carl Wilkens' presentation.
Yeah, they absolutely. When those three legs of that stool are strong, we have a stronger civil society, we have a stronger democracy. And elements of democracy are part of what the students discussed at the end, because I think they've come to realize in the course of this course, the genocide class, is that for some of them they feel democracy is more fragile. Some of them spoke to that, others not so much, but some felt like it's our democracy and the stability of our society is not guaranteed. And I think, and I hope, that one of the elements of this course is a focus on what we can do to strengthen the society that we live in.
That's pretty powerful. So tell me, you're a teacher, and do you consider yourself a history teacher, a civics teacher?
How can you separate the two? I teach history to strengthen civics education, and and history has to be part of civics education. So the two things are, part of the same fabric. But my background is in civics. I've always been especially passionate about government. But I think that you can't separate the two. They're part and parcel of the same thing.
Over the years, we've expanded our offerings in the state of Connecticut on ensuring, firstly, I think we started with genocide awareness through the adoption of a requirement that there be offerings in genocide studies and Holocaust studies. We've expanded that over the years to include cultural awareness and the understanding of the different cultures that make up the fabric of the state of Connecticut. How do you incorporate some of those more recent efforts into your role as a teacher?
So the genocide course that I taught was offered before this. Is a bit unique,
Great.
I think, because it was offered at E.O. Smith High School before that mandate took place. But that mandate still affected us because not everyone at E.O. Smith High School takes the course. Yeah. And all students must have knowledge of genocide and the Holocaust before they graduate. And the spirit of that legislation states that we can't just define the terms in the classroom. Students really have to understand what causes genocide to happen. Where did the Holocaust come from? And if you're learning that in one day, you leave students with the impression that this happened overnight. Hitler became chancellor, 6 million Jews, and that wasn't the whole Holocaust, 6 million Jewish people were slaughtered, many millions more, and then almost like it just happened out of nowhere. But the complexity is so much greater than that. And I think the genocide course allows a real avenue to focus on that. But you also mentioned civics education, and I think the real goal of a good education is to prepare students for participation in the democracy that they live in. And that's why I'm so passionate about civics education, because it's such a direct way of teaching students that, but also empowering them to take part in the world after high school. This is what's getting them ready for adulthood. This is what's getting them ready to be full participants and to have a stronger voice for themselves. And that's why I think it's absolutely critical.
That's great. What I see in so many ways is the possibility here of not only building that connective tissue to their past, the connective tissue to our shared experience, but also to the possibilities that lay before us. And it's with that level of optimism through the skills, I think, that you're helping build that these young people are going to be successful. And ultimately, isn't that what parents want for their children when they engage in an education system, is preparedness for the world that lies ahead of them?
Yeah, this is their academic maturity. This is their opportunity to kind of grow, not only in terms of their knowledge, but their character. That's what Martin Luther King Jr. defined education, right? A good education is knowledge and character.
Well, listen, thank you for bringing your methodology, your vision, but also your young people to the collective experience of the state. I hope that more of our districts will join us and highlight what they're doing, not only to build that connective tissue within their own civic environment that the school happens to be, but to prepare young people for their future. And thanks for being a teacher. It's not easy to be a teacher. Oftentimes it feels like you're under-resourced and over-optimistic, but you found a balance, and we really appreciate you for everything you do.
Yeah. Thank you, and
Thank
thank
you,
you
sir.
for emphasizing and promoting this
Thank you,
history.
Joe.
Yeah, thank
Thanks.
you.